This talk is going to be about how programmers can empower designers in Unreal Engine 4. Before we go into the talk, I'll just tell something about me. I am Somasundara Pandian. I've been working with Unreal since it was launched in like 5 years back. I've also been working in Unity. Initially, I was doing 3D software, visualizations, VR, AR, MR, etc. Then whole enterprise package. Now I'm part of Sumo-Digital. So yeah, we are making games now. What's my range of abilities here? I'm someone you call a generalist, basically. I can do everything on a project you want. You want a C++ plugin in Unreal. I can do that for you. If you want networking, UI, gameplay stuff, I've been doing that. I'm not a specialist in a single area, but I work with designers a lot in Sumo. I've been doing a lot of gameplay work, and this talk is basically going to be how I've been helping them to like get products out faster, how we shorten the iteration time on our projects and stuff. Okay, let's go ahead. Before we go forward with this, just few slides on what Sumo as a company is. There seems to be no audio. Just think there's amazing music on the back end. Okay, I can't beatbox here, so you're just going to have to live with silence. Yeah. Audio. The car is drifting. There's amazing music happening on the back end. You guys are not hearing it, but yeah, just know it's amazing. I'm a programmer, so my humor is mostly dry. Hey, you get to hear that now. That's us. So let's talk about Sumo a little. Was founded in like 2003. It was based off Sheffield, which is a UK. If anyone knows the UK landscape, most of the gaming companies are around there, and we have multiple sister studios in Nottingham and multiple more. And what we do, we have an expertise in developing great IP for others and our own. So Snake Pass is one of our high selling IPs, and we are always on the cutting edge. We are always trying to push forward the industry as much as we can. And recently we won the Develop Star Awards as Best Studio of 2019. These are all the studios that's in Sheffield, and in India our presence is currently only in Pune. These are all the games that the studio as a whole has worked on. You can see there's a lot on there. So what's this talk about? Okay, we want to try and give designers the freedom they want. That's mainly what the gameplay programmer's work is, and that's what I'm going to talk about, and only in the context of Unreal Engine 4. There are techniques you can apply to other engines, but I'm going to talk about features that are in Unreal that you guys should be aware of it, but you might not be using it as intended, or you might not be using it as often as you can. So for guys who have worked on Unreal before, the few that raise your hands, this might be a reintroduction to those features. Okay, so this applies to games, enterprise applications, and this is not a talk on editor programming. If you're looking for a talk on editor programming, this is not it. Unreal has a lot of videos out, teaching material out that talks you through that, but this is not that. I want to stress that. And things we'll see. First, let's see what all you do with the designer. That's the day-to-day stuff, right? A gameplay programmer interacts with the designer daily. On daily basis, he needs to look at them, he needs to go through all the design ideas he has and finally implement it. So what it's required for him is better communication. Again, the simplest trick for better communication is understanding where he comes from. There's a really good talk on this. The talk this time around is short, so we are not going to cover that. I would say watch the talk called Designers Are From Venus and Programmers Are From Uranus. Yeah, that's a joke. That's a programmer joke as well. Then we are going to look at source control. I'll delve into why source control is important and why you as a programmer should be aware of it. And if there are some studio heads out here, why you're not implementing it the right way. Again, the programmers are supposed to be aware of this. So then I'm going to be talking about feature iteration times. How you can improve the feature iteration time on individual features. Like you're working on a power up, how do you improve the feature iteration time on that? That's usually a short sprint of like 1 week or 2 weeks. So how do you go past improving your time on that? And that's basically, you can adopt many things. Data driven design, if you're been in the industry long enough, you should probably know this. For people working in mobile, this is not about taking user data and then plugging it in and just analyzing it. This is something different. I'll speak about that later as well. And then creating bespoke editors, bespoke, just plainly customizable editors. Source control. Many might be asking, really, you're talking about source control? It's a tried and tested thing, I know, but the game industry has had a hard time finding good source control, right? Why? Because we use binaries, and source control has generally had issues with handling binaries files. Perforce does a good job, but there are still some issues. Let's see what's so difficult in Unreal Engine. You have a content only and blueprint only project. You're like, everything is TK. There are no issues there, right? You submit the content, your artist or the designer takes it, and everything works fine. When you bring code in, this is what happens. Yes, programmer, you again. The issue with this, let's break it down. What's wrong here? When you bring in code, you're basically changing the binary file. Unreal doesn't have something that Unity does, where they have .meta files that specify how it changes, and it uses C#, which is an interpreter language, which doesn't generally need to like change code at compile time. So it generates binaries, DLLs, that needs to change each time a code changes, right? So that's always large file sizes. How many, those people who have used Unreal, how large is your project? It's pretty large, right? It's GB sizes. My wife doesn't work in the gaming industry. She has a very old laptop. Unity runs in it. I bring Unreal over it. Nah, it doesn't work. It's because Unreal gives you a lot of things, but sometimes, I don't want to go on a rant here, but yeah, you can come talk to me later and I can go into a deeper thing about that. We have short time. So because of large file sizes, we have slow sync time. So even if you're using a source controller Perforce, it takes really long to sync everything. When I go up to a designer in the morning, I meet him. What you doing, man? I'm waiting for the file to sync. How long have you been waiting? 30 minutes. That's usually the case. And why? That's because the files are large, and we in Sumo usually directly compile from source. We like doing modifications. We like that Unreal is open source. That's one of the reasons people use Unreal, right? It's open source. You can go and modify the engine. But if you modify the engine, that's a shit ton of new binaries that come in. And when you submit that to Perforce, more file sizes that needs to be synced. So how do you sync these files? Okay, that's one way you do it. You do it by manually submitting it. That's slow. You don't do that if you're a programmer, you're interacting with designers daily, and you need to manually submit it. That's like 15-20 minutes of your time daily, and that cuts in on production as well. So you don't do that. Okay, let's automate submissions. That's one way. What are the major issues that I faced most of the time in production, when even automating the submission process? So the first thing is editor does not load. This happens a lot. When you try to sync the DLLs, there's a mix-up and the editor doesn't load, and you have to go and support the designer to get it running, see what's the issue. Again, a day lost. And loss of data. This is something rare, but happens as well. So when you accidentally do not submit the DLL, what happens is he takes a sync, he doesn't have the new source code changes, he opens the BP up, does some change, saves it, works the whole day thinking, yeah, everything's fine, nothing's going to break. And then the next day, when the DLs actually go into the project, all his changes are overwritten, or he just has two states now. And sometimes what happens is he submits the old changes, and there are like data mismatches here and there, and loss of data. So this is something we want to avoid. Let's see, what does Epic say? This is something that Epic says in its documentation. If you are using Unreal, just go through Epic's documentation. That's a must. It says use build graph. Okay, what's build graph? It's a script based automation system. You just run it and it submits the build. This is something we use for automation as well. But here's the thing, that's an issue with it. This is also something Epic says as well. They are basically saying all the things that I'm voicing out now. Binaries are large, slow sync times, and there are issues with the shaders not compiling properly, the DLs mismatching and stuff. So how do we avoid this? UGS, Unreal GameSig, is something we use to avoid this in our studio. We have it in an ongoing project right now. It works really great. Our designers are happy. I don't have a designer here to attest to it, but all our designers are happy with this at this point. A little disclaimer before we go into UGS, it works only with Perforce. It works on Windows. So if for some reason you're developing on Linux with Unreal at this point, based on the cloud here, I don't think that's happening. But that's something Unreal might be working on. You could go and ask those guys over there. And it needs some pre-setup done. That needs to be set up. I'm not going to the setup details. Again, the documentation is out there. I'm just reiterating that you should be using this. So what's Unreal GameSync? Unreal GameSync is a front-end UI that basically replaces source control for designers. They still have to go and submit stuff, but they can use the front end to get syncs, and they can use it to basically do what Perforce does on a day-to-day basis. So let's see, Unreal as end user settings, and it needs to be set up in a way that's a metadata server. This runs on IaaS, which usually is easy to set up, and then it also requires a Perforce server, which gives them the CL numbers and the CL build list. And there's an automated build system that pushes the binaries to Perforce. And we usually use Jenkins for automation because it's free, open source, and everybody in India loves open source, right? It stores compressed binaries. That's an important point there, and I'll come back to that later. But why is this easy for designers, or why this is required for designers? If you're a gameplay programmer, you need to be talking to your TD or someone to get this in your project. Why? Because it's easy to use. You set it up once. You don't need Visual Studio installed. I've seen some studios and some projects that use Unreal ask the designers to install Visual Studio. I don't know why a designer always asks the question, but they're like, okay, it needs Visual Studio to compile. Causes the system to slow down. There are issues with it. Here we totally don't need that. And it also has some stuff for flagging builds, which are good or bad. This usually helps on a much larger team. And again, faster sync times. The faster sync times are basically due to the compressed binary. So what Unreal does is it goes through all the DLLs, the PDB files that has the symbols, and it strips them down and compresses that to, we have found in our project to be around 300 MB, then pushes it to Perforce, then brings it back down. Usually the sync time is under 5 minutes. It's no longer, hey, what you're doing, I'm doing a 30-minute sync. No, you're done with it now. Dry humor again. Build and submit to Perforce. You can get all this script online. If you're unable to read it, anyway, you'll be Googling this later. So it uses the same script-based build graph system, and it suffixes the zip file with the CL numbers, and it sums them to the Perforce. Then you basically pull them down from Perforce and unzip it locally. This is all automated though. You don't have to do it. UGS does this for you. I understand in India, most people are not using Perforce. Many big companies are, but if you're not and you want a solution, you probably are in a small man team in a local environment. So you can still try and figure out this for your game. So it's only zip file, right? You could unzip it on your own, and the build still stores the zip file locally as well. You could just add a script to it that takes the build to a network drive. Then you can add a extra build step that basically unzips it. If you want to look at the code, again, advantages of being an open source software, right? UGS's code is totally online. And if you're using the vanilla version of the engine, or basically the editor version of the engine, and you're like, where is this UGS you're talking about? It's usually not there. It's in the source code. So if anyone goes to check their engine after this talk and you're like, I can't find UGS, it's in the GitHub. It's easy to hook up. You just have to compile it, but you could find the source for how the archive basically unzips there, and you could do that manually. I've tried it. It works. it could be a solution for small end studios. But if you are going large, it's probably best to get purpose at that point. So let's talk about data-driven design. Okay. So how many of you are aware of data-driven design? So if you're a programmer, you should be aware of this by now. Again, this is not mobile data. Okay. This is data-driven design. So we try to use data to drive our design goals, right? So designers in India are usually not going to do visual scripting in Unreal. We don't have technical designers here. So they are going to be working with data. They're going to be modifying data on a daily basis. So when you write code, you need to be according to that. So the basic or the bare minimum in data-oriented design is you don't hard code anything. That's something I found lacking in juniors. When I see someone hard code a value, it just makes me mad. Don't do that. That's the basic principle of data-driven design. And again, if you're a veteran programmer at this point and you're confusing data-driven design with data-oriented design, that's why I had the first line there. It's not data-oriented design. It's completely different. Decide on the data and your logic beforehand. So some people don't do this. So this comes down to communication as well. Go to your designer, speak with them, decide on the data that he wants beforehand, decide on the logic that the data is going to go through. I write primarily C++ code. I design systems with the C++ code, and I need to provide the designer with data for him to modify through those systems. So we need to have a talk before we actually go and code these things. So data-driven design is a big help for this. And last, have them in a normal human-readable format. That's useful, right? XML, CSV, and there are so many formats. JSON is something mobile users. And advantage of data-driven design, it gives clarity on structure for design and programming. Because you decide on this logic and data that's going through the system beforehand, that basically means you're going to look at the problem more, right? And you get more clarity from it, and you'll be like, I thought of it like this. So I've always seen designers go, hey, I've had this idea. I went like this. Okay, what's the data you're going to process? What you're going to, you have to like ask these questions to them. And then you get more clarity. And when you write it down, you figure out the problems in it, right? And this helps. So having a data-driven mindset helps in solving problems that are going to arise in the future. So it also unshackles the designers from programmers. If designer wants something changed, he just goes in there, tweaks the value, and he gets it, right? Because you already decided on the logic and already decided on what's going to happen with it, right? So what does data-driven design encompass? It encompasses a whole array of scenarios, right? Localization, that's an important thing. Stats, scaling for items and characters. But yeah, data-driven design gives you advantages where you can basically drive your whole gameplay through just Excel sheets. And how does Unreal help you with it? Again, Unreal has built-in support for CSV files. So have Excel files, export them to CSVs, and then drive your gameplay using that. So my personal opinion is XML is a powerful format, but Excel is a powerful tool. You give a good designer an Excel, and he's able to use that to do more things, right? And the Unreal structures that support these. Data tables, Unreal has a data table class that support these formats. You have a Unreal struct, you define it as a data table, and you basically get your structure from it. The data table assets or the individual variables or all the columns, right? And these can be in the Excel, and the Excel exports them to a CSV. There's curve tables as well if you're looking to have like a gradient curve, a curve that basically drives economic growth in your game or something. Custom editor tools. As I said, I'm not talking about editor programming here. That basically means no reference to Unreal editor module. We do use that sometimes, but why do I don't want to talk about it here? Basically, when you're starting out, this is what you want to do, but this is what you actually do. Unreal's editor programming usually uses Slate underneath. This is for C++ programmers. So Slate is really hard to get into. That's why Unreal started introducing UMG, which is a way more easier UI thing, right? So what I'm going to talk about, tools for the lazy. So these are quick things a programmer can hook up. Again, not in Blueprint. This is from C++ perspective and some Blueprint at the end. So what are the pre-existing engine features we can use? If you use Unreal for a while, you know there are prop specifiers, right? This is the easiest way. I don't see people using them the fullest extent they want. When they work with Unity, they are like, I got this variable in the inspector and it works. Yes, Unreal does that as well. I have to tell them Unreal does that. I don't know why, but they don't realize that it's so easy. You just go U property on top of a variable and it becomes serialized and it gets exposed to your details panel. There are some useful metadata specifiers that I like. Make edit widget, which basically gives you a 3D transform that you can move left and right. Edit condition, which I recently found out even supports expressions. So using edit condition, you can enable or disable a variable based on what condition you provide. Then allowed classes. This is really useful as well. And clamp in, clamp max. I'm just going to speed through all the rest now. Editor only function callback. This is something I use often. My favorite editor only function is post edit change property. Whenever a property changes, I get a callback in C++ and I can do something with it. Before Unreal introduced Blutility extensions for editors, it's basically editor utility widgets. This was something I was using more often. So I basically code a Boolean in and just use it as a function over and over. Console variables. Again, it takes 4 lines to set up. But when I ask a junior to go, hey, can you get a console variable for this so that the designer can enable the feature on and off? He's like, it's hard, bro. It's not hard. It's just 4 lines. Come on, code that in. Debug draws. Debug draws are important. I've seen programmers use it in for visualizing their code, but for some reason they don't expose it to the designers. And this is specific to other programs that I've seen outside of Sumo. So Sumo uses it a lot. Quick debug menus. Unreal has the power of blueprints, right? And with blueprints, you could quickly throw a debug menu on there. So for example, so we talked about console variables and data-driven design. Take the console variables, put them in a Excel file or a data table. You don't even need an Excel file for that. You just create a data table in Unreal, put them in there, then hook up a quick debug menu that shows all the console variables, and you just give them controls to turn them on and off. You're like, why do we need that? You can just go into the console, type it, and the designers will be able to use it. Sometimes designers don't want to type, right? They just don't want to use the console. They are more comfortable when they're playing the game. If they want to turn off a feature, they use a joystick, right? So they want to bring up the debug menu, turn off the feature, then go back to playing. They don't want to break from what they're doing right now. There are other stuff that I was talking about, like editor utility widgets, scripted editor actions, again, and custom events points. So if you're using Blueprint a lot, if you have a custom event and there's a checkbox to make a button out of it, and you get it during editor time, and you can execute it during editor time. That's it.